Hello, all you wonderful people. My name is Jason, and I am an ISFP. This channel is my ISFP journey. Thank you so much for watching. I do ask that you would please subscribe, and if you find this video useful, I ask also that you would hit a like, and if you have anything that you'd like to add or any thoughts that I missed that you think are important, please leave me a comment, because I'm really hoping that I'll get some interaction on these videos so that I can better understand what it means to be an ISFP. You can better understand what it means to be an ISFP. We can better understand other personality types and help them to better understand us so that we can improve our relationships with all the people in our lives. Today, we're going to be talking about cognitive functions. Now, in my previous video, I stated that there were 8 cognitive functions. 4 of them are perceiving functions and 4 of them are judging functions. Today, we're going to begin with the judging functions. The judging functions are extroverted and introverted thinking and extroverted and introverted feeling. Now, I don't script these videos. I just kind of talk out what is on my mind, and I have kind of gone over it in my mind already. So my intention in this video is to talk about introverted and extroverted thinking. Now, if the video is not very long, I might go ahead and just flow right into introverted and extroverted feeling, but I'll probably break that up into a second video. So let's start talking about introverted and extroverted thinking. Any thinking function, either introverted or extroverted, or maybe I should say either thinking function, introverted or extroverted, deals heavily with logic, with reason, with practicality or pragmatism. What works, what doesn't, what is true, what is false, what makes sense, what works in the realm of logic. Introverted thinking is sort of an a logicking mechanism by which a person comes to their own conclusions on whether or not something is true or false, accurate, inaccurate. Largely, if a person is processing information through the lens of introverted thinking, they're going to really be coming to their own conclusions without taking necessarily into account what the group has to say about it. Now, you're going to hear me talk a lot as I talk about introverted and extroverted functions in general about the group. The group is those other people. Now, that group could be those other people, like the whole world, like everybody on planet Earth, or it could be everybody in my society. But more often than not, the group that might actually have an influence on a person is the group that that person trusts. So it could be your friends, that might be your group, it could be your church or your religious organization. It could be your peers, it could be your family, it could be your spouse, your children, whomever you look at and say, you know, those people are my people, basically. So when I talk about the group, that definition of who the group is can vary pretty dramatically, person to person. But with introverted thinking takes a concept or an idea, a truth, or maybe it's not a truth, but it's an idea that's being presented as a possible truth, or takes some bit of data, and it organizes it or it processes it and tries to fit it into an internal framework, a self-generated or self-realized system, and determines, does this work? Does this bit of information that I've just received work in this logical framework that I already have going on in my mind that has sort of evolved over the course of my life? Introverted thinking is going to take what it already knows or what it already affirms as being true, accurate, and it's going to then analyze, you know, any new information through that process on its own, largely independent from any outside influence by the group, okay? Now, let's contrast that with extroverted thinking. Extroverted thinking is very concerned with the world out there. Do things work? Do they function like they're supposed to function? And extroverted thinking is going to borrow much more or be influenced much more or see the wisdom, let's say, much more of the intelligence that has gone before. So extroverted thinking might look at a system that is in place, a way of doing things. Let's say you work at a job and there's this way of doing things, okay? And the experts all basically agree, yeah, this is the best way of doing it. Extroverted thinking is going to be asking the question, is that the best way? But extroverted thinking is also willing to take into account the intelligence of the group. So let's take somebody who really trusts authorities on a particular subject, all right? If the authorities on that subject, if the vast majority of them say, this is the way, this is the best way, this is true, this is accurate, then extroverted thinking is going to hold that in a much more high regard than introverted thinking will. Introverted thinking might say, yeah, I mean, I respect the fact that you guys all have PhDs in this particular field, but yeah, what you're saying just doesn't hold water. I've really thought this through and it just doesn't work, so I can't go there with you. So introverted thinking is not being swayed very heavily by the intelligence of the group. Extroverted thinking cares more or sees more genuine value in the opinions or the intelligence of the group. Introverted thinking is sort of a self-generated or maybe even an innate intelligence, whereas extroverted thinking you could think of, in a sense, as being more of a borrowed intelligence. Extroverted thinking is much more interested in the intelligence that has gone before, what people have done leading up to this point, what they have thought, the systems that they have created. We, in fact, live in a rather extroverted thinking society. Our school system is a very extroverted thinking school system. The way that society functions in general is very extroverted thinking. And to an extent, it kind of needs to be. I mean, you have to have a number of people get on the same page about something in order to really get anything done. So extroverted thinking will tend to align itself more with a group thought, with the intelligence of the group that it trusts. And introverted thinking can definitely agree with other people, but it's not afraid to disagree if it just doesn't see the value, if it doesn't look at the concept and say, yes, I've thought through that logically in my mind and I've come to the conclusion, true. So the thinking functions in general are very all about, true or false. Is this true? Is it false? Is it accurate? Is it inaccurate? Is it pragmatic, or does it work, or does it not work? Okay, so someone who has very high introverted thinking, like I have an INTP daughter, I have an ISTP son, and they both have introverted thinking as their lead function, or their hero function, and I definitely see some very interesting characteristics about that we'll go into more in depth when we talk about INTPs and ISTPs. But just as an example, my INTP daughter, her whole life, and before I really understood personality type, this was really hard for me, okay, as her dad. But my INTP daughter has always been kind of like, I would tell her, this is what is true, and you need to be thinking about this. You need to put this into practice. This matters. And I could tell that she was just like, yeah, maybe. She was deciding for herself whether or not it mattered. She wasn't just going to take my word for it. She had to learn on her own. She had to go experiment, experience, research. She had to take in as much information as she could and process it through her own lens of intelligence that worked internally inside of her mind. I couldn't see what was going on or understand it, but it was going on in there, and she was logicking these things out, if I can make a verb out of the word logic. She was logicking these things out, and she was coming to her own conclusions on, is dad right or is dad wrong? Is dad true? Is what dad's saying true, or is it false? Okay. And I used to always be like, oh my gosh, she's one of these people who has to learn everything for herself. She won't take anybody's word for anything. That's introverted thinking. Extroverted thinking is much more ready to receive information and consider it to be trustworthy, especially if it already trusts the source, okay? So extroverted thinking, much more likely to say, yeah, these people all agree that this is done this way. I respect those people. It's not just 51% of the human population says this. No, if extroverted thinking sees a lack of value or intelligence or wisdom in the group that's speaking, then it's not just automatically going to cling on to their ideas and say, yeah, I agree with that. It's not mindless. Extroverted thinking is very intelligent, but it if the group, like, let's say that I had an ESTJ daughter and my daughter had somewhere along the line learned to trust me, like said, okay, dad really seems to know what he's talking about the majority of the time, which I'm not saying that I do, but let's just hypothetically say that magically happened. And she might say, okay, dad tends to be right. Like I've seen the proof, I've seen the evidence that what he tends to say works or is right. So I'm willing to take his word for it on this next situation or this next example or whatever it is where I might give her advice. Whereas introverted thinking is going to be, yeah, I'm going to have to run that through my own data banks and see if it processes properly. Okay, neither one is good. Or bad. Let me say it that way. Neither one is good or bad. Neither one is right or wrong. I want you to understand that as we go through the function stack, we go through the different cognitive functions and we talk about different personality types. There aren't good ones and bad ones. They all have their advantages and they all have their disadvantages. And for the most part, the disadvantages usually come in the situation that all of us tend to use one of the cognitive functions a lot and tend to ignore, downplay, not use, not exercise another cognitive function. So for someone like my daughter, my INTP daughter, she's using that TI, that introverted thinking, all the time. That's her hero function. But she is not putting very much emphasis or very much weight on extroverted thinking. So she is not just taking anyone's word for it. Now that can be good, right? It isn't always wise to just take everyone's word for things. But at the same time, sometimes listening to someone and receiving the advice that they have to offer because they've lived it, they've experienced it, they know what they're talking about. Sometimes there's some wisdom and value in that, right? The Bible says there is wisdom in a multitude of counselors. Well, people with TI tend to be their own counselor much more than relying on others. So anyway, I hope you found this interesting, this TI versus TE, introverted thinking and extroverted thinking video. My next one will be on introverted and extroverted feeling. I am going to break it up into two. I kind of thought that I would end up doing that. I really wish you would subscribe and follow along. I also really wish you would leave some comments and let me know what you think. Help me to understand better where maybe my understanding is flawed. Thank you so much for watching and have an awesome day. Bye now.